All right, everyone. So, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where it is that you're tuning in from. Welcome to all of our friends tuning in from the United States and from around the world. This is our fourth Cities of Tech live podcast event. I cannot believe it's number four, but it is number four.
Woo!
Thank you, Espree. So today's session features a deep dive into the future of LA tech and startups. So really amazing stuff going on over in LA. Really looking forward to our conversation today. So 5 incredible community leaders from LA Tech coming in to share all their insight and incredible work with us. They include Anuj Varma from BAM Ventures. We also have Calvin South, Program Manager at Annenberg Tech and Pledge LA. We have Espree Devora, podcast producer and host, Women in Tech Show, and community manager at wearelatech.com. We have Mickey Reynolds from Grid 110, the executive director, and Rachel Espiritu, senior director of development from Toolbox LA. So woohoo, we got everyone from all over LA just to learn from all of you. It's really incredible. So before we get to our conversation, a little bit about our organization, Line Run. Line Run is an experiential career and industry education platform for tomorrow's workforce. We empower our community of leaders to connect, innovate, and grow through media, events, and programs such as today's session. We invite you to check out our website, www.linerun.co, to learn more about our podcasts, classes, and career accelerator programs. So, Line Run. With that, we're gonna jump right in and start our one-on-one spotlights with Anuj. So,
Wait, can we just say hi to everybody first, Brian?
sure, okay.
Like, shout out to Daniel, to Chris, to Cheryl, to Carrie, to Belina, to Baruch, I hope I'm saying your name right, to Audrey, to Annette, to EJ, to Eddie, to Evinkder. I wonder what country you're zooming in from, to Elena, to Elizabeth, to Emily, to Emilio. I can't get to everybody, but we are so excited to have you here. All right, take it away, Brian.
Definitely. So, like I said, we have everyone here and we're all excited. So, Anuj, I'm going to start with you. A lot of noticeable shifts from the start of the pandemic to today on how investors view opportunities in the LA market and startups tech in general. How has COVID affected the way VCs in LA engage with early stage startups and potential investment opportunities?
Yeah, sure, Brian. And thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for having me here. I think there are a couple thoughts that come to mind when you ask the question. I mean, I think that COVID has had, it's almost like two different phases of thinking for venture investors. I think at first there was like this period of shock where, really nobody knew what to do and how to sort of interpret what was happening, which, sort of put things on pause. And to some extent, there still is, a lot of that thinking kind of in the venture ecosystem. So it's, I think a lot of venture investors are trying to identify how they're going to be thinking about the world going forward, trying to assess like the kinds of opportunities they're seeing and trying to interface with founders to identify sort of how they're thinking about, what we'll call the new normal and what things will persist and what won't. So, I think we're kind of in that second phase of thinking where people are actually trying to, parse out what may happen in the future and, how they should sort of plan for that. I think for me, COVID really has accelerated a lot of secular trends that were already happening. Things like distributed work, video communications, the emphasis on gaming, telehealth, even things like logistics efficiency. Those were all trends that existed, before COVID, and COVID has kind of pulled all of that into the present. And so, you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing a lot of behavioral change among consumers as well as among businesses. And, as much as that can be kind of a painful activity to experience, and there's obviously a lot of carnage that COVID has, wrought on our society and particularly in LA, behavioral change can also be a really interesting catalyst for entrepreneurship, for investors, you know, a lot of the best companies were built around, you know, a change in behavior. And so that's something that I think is in some ways kind of encouraging or at least something interesting, like as a concept to think about as you think about, you know, the world going forward. And, you know, it's funny right now we're at this phase kind of in the world where, you know, I think in years past or just the thinking that previously existed was that, you know, startups were here to disrupt something, right? Like startups disrupt kind of the status quo and engage in some sort of disruption of you know, what's currently happening within business. And now we're in a situation where there's like this rapid disruption that's being presented to us, and you know, and now we're trying to seek solutions, you know, for that disruption that's here already. So it's kind of an interesting inverse of what's, you know, what the thinking has been in a lot of ways. So I think, you know, as far as, you know, how venture investors are reacting, I think deals are happening. I think it's sort of at a slower pace than in recent times. I think if you looked at the data, you know, you would still see deals being consummated, and you'll see, you know, several in the news. I mean, Heal just raised a $100 million round. I mean, OpenPath, you know, raised $36 million. And these are notable, you know, LA-based companies that are doing really well and raising significant amounts of capital, but they happen to be kind of in those segments where there are lots of tailwinds behind them. And so, you know, I think we'll see more of that. You know, venture dollars will follow kind of growth and where there is activity. And so, those segments that are seeing successful tailwinds, you know, from COVID, I think will immediately benefit. But I think there's still, you know, a lot of great positive sentiment about LA, and like, you know, the tailwinds that existed before with growth in certain segments. I think another tailwind was, you know, LA being this really core ecosystem for technology, for startups, for, you know, the entrepreneurial world. And I think that's also, you know, something that people are doubling down on. I think that a lot of the segments where there are tailwinds, LA is kind of the beneficiary of some of those segments, particularly in like entertainment content or even in health and wellness and things like that. You know, LA has really benefited from some of those tailwinds. And so I think there is, you know, long-term interest continuing to be in LA. And I think there's a lot of, you know, positive thinking, but we're obviously still in a challenging time, and everyone is trying to work through it and trying to identify, you know, sort of the best path forward.
Couldn't agree more. And it definitely sounds to me, and you hit on this just a few seconds ago, you know, building on those core competencies of what LA was known for even before, you know, this tech explosion from the last couple of years, building on the fact that it's this mecca for entertainment and for media and in some ways manufacturing, and really elevating and slowly putting the blocks together and moving forward, where it's not just one sector and it's siloed, where it's all connected. And even if some areas are a little bit slow to adjust or to return, there are other sectors that can pick up the slack and then start the momentum to get going. Great. So I think many people tie investments in startups to opportunities for talent to grow and develop in a particular market, which brings us to LA's diversity and inclusion efforts in the tech industry, which is a space that Calvin actively works in every day. And Calvin, the city of LA, huge strides over the past few years. So I'd say one of the notable cities in the country that's made very significant efforts to serve underserved communities in the tech scene as it's growing. How did the pandemic impact the city's current and future initiatives on D&I, diversity and inclusion in tech? And what role will Annenberg Tech and Pledge LA play in providing more opportunities for these communities going forward?
Sure, yeah, well, thanks for having me again. And I'm Calvin with Pledge LA and Annenberg Tech. So a little bit about Pledge LA for those that don't know is we are a collective of about 200 VC firms and tech companies based in LA that are working to measurably improve diversity and equity. That's kind of a difference we're trying to create from some other initiatives where companies have said, we care about diversity, we're on the list, we're going to take the pledge. Our companies are stepping up a little bit more, and our members agree to actually share data about their policies and from their staff. So all of us come together, take one large central survey. So we actually got a little bit of coverage earlier this month, mid last month in the LA Times about it sort of being one of the largest regional surveys of its type. But despite all of that, I will push back a little bit and say, even though LA has a lot of great leaders that are focused on what I think are some clear best practices about what works versus what doesn't work when it comes to diversity and equity, we have a long way to go. So I wouldn't say we've made great strides. I'd say that we have a lot of leaders. We're grateful to have, more gender representation in terms of men and women, at least of those genders, in LA tech companies from some of the early survey data we're seeing. But this year, I mean, we've all been experiencing 2020 in our own way, but it has been a roller coaster for diversity and equity, at least from where we sit at Pledge LA. The first thing to acknowledge when we go all the way back to, when the pandemic hit and, many job losses were first witnessed, we started to see some concerning patterns of maybe some of the gains that tech companies had made in hiring more women, more people of color from underrepresented backgrounds, that they may have been disproportionately affected by those layoffs. In some cases, we know that that's the case. So, we're sort of took a step back and said, hey, how are companies going to recoup from that? Maybe these were initiatives that took years to build. The second thing that kind of happened was, because everyone was in such a crisis mode, we were facing, health crisis, economic crisis. There was sort of this weird feeling from some companies that diversity and equity work just might maybe sort of be a back burner thing, or maybe not feeling as mission critical, which with what I just told you, it was sort of very challenging for us. We were sort of saying, yes, people are dramatically restructuring, they're facing their own challenges, but now's a time when you're working from home, maybe when you're not growing as much, you can do that core strategic planning you might not have had time for. And then, we fast forward a little bit and May 25th came around, and only a few weeks, looking back from how much now in sort of this next chapter of our lives this year, we're now in LA and across the nation talking about diversity and equity work in a little bit more of a real deal way. And that is by talking about how anti-racism and racism are part of those conversations. I mean, even you'll notice me saying diversity and equity versus diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's not because I think inclusion is bad, but I think there's sort of a shift of, instead of like, I'm going to include a seat for you at the table, there's sort of a question of like, this is really about much, much deeper things about how much people are getting paid, because even though we are seeing gender representation in LA, we're seeing a big pay gap for women, which is unacceptable in 2020. We're also seeing, a lack of access to capital for underrepresented founders. So founders of color, women founders. And, what inspires me about LA, and this is, to brag a little bit about Pledge LA and our board, is we have a lot of leaders who are part of other initiatives like All Raise or Black VC or Latinx VC that are having these conversations nationally. So they kind of are bringing those conversations back to Los Angeles, and helps us move a little bit faster. I also think that, even though there's tons of racism and inequality in LA, like I like to call it sort of the train scenario, that we are a little bit more comfortable day to day of being around other people of color, different backgrounds on the day to day, even if they don't all live and share our communities. So that gives us, I think it means that organizations can maybe become a little diverse earlier. And I know we're going to talk about future cities a little bit later, but to kind of zoom back to the future of DEI initiatives in LA. One big problem we're really trying to solve from the Pledge LA side is, if you look at opportunities for quote unquote diverse candidates in tech, there really is still a big dichotomy that favors students who have educational privilege, students who are gifted, underrepresented students, who are able to access sort of competitive tech opportunities. Whereas sometimes you see a lot of city and county dollars designed for, and I'm not fully in love with this term, but it is used for opportunity youth, for people who maybe are not on the, I got a bachelor's degree right out of college and I have straight A's and I'm jumping into a tech company. And what I'm trying to figure out now is the city of LA has actually allocated, millions of dollars for, young adults, and they're interested, and I'm trying to work with an organization, Hire LA's Youth, to find tech companies where we can pair them with opportunities. And there's even some funding for them to have hardware, because, they got to work from home and get broadband and hotspots like us on Zoom. But the real challenge there that we look at is, going, the culture, and we ask about culture on Pledge LA's survey in tech companies, we have to ask ourselves, is it receptive to people of different income backgrounds? or is it a place where mostly wealthy, educated folks work? And what happens when someone, who's coming from an economically disadvantaged community is doing their first internship? We care about that going well. So we often encourage training partners. And really, what's exciting about this, and the last thing I'll kind of leave in my response is, there's a new thing we're seeing a lot of in larger cities, larger tech hubs like Silicon Valley, Dari mentioned them, that are doing a lot of apprenticeship, where they're looking at, particularly for that kind of, I don't already have a CS degree, student who's more of a career pivot to tech, of bringing people at a level below that entry level role and upskilling them and training them inside of the company. And that's all great and fancy, but one of the disadvantages of LA Tech is we have a lot more early stage companies that don't have that huge recruitment budget or program. So we're trying to figure out, how can we take some of those same values, which are a willingness to say, like, okay, I might invest in training in someone that might be like, a 3 times more loyal employee than that person who I recruited from Stanford because they had a Stanford degree, and have that happen at a smaller scale. So we're still trying to figure that out. But another great opportunity is a lot of young people who are looking for internships now, with everyone having virtual college and high school, are more available during the year. So we're excited to kind of find opportunities to move beyond the summer internship and create year-round opportunities for people to work remotely, just as we are as adults. So I think there's a lot there. So a lot in that answer, but yeah, that's some of the things we're thinking about with D&I initiatives in LA.
I love it. And going back to something at the heart of what you mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's not necessarily D&I inclusion, it's about equality, and how do you really work to achieve that. And I think the fact that you guys recognize that and are actively trying to approach all of your solutions with that frame of mind does wonders for both your employer partners and also the community who will end up benefiting from those programs. So that's really incredible. So moving into, talking about startups. So, LA Tech blossomed over the years, driven primarily by building on those core competencies of entertainment, media, manufacturing, the things that LA has been known for, and then growing a wealth of talent, just sparking innovation on all cylinders. And someone who's seen all of these changes in person is Espree. So I'd love to loop you in here. And from your perspective as a local founder and community builder who's been in the community from almost day zero, what changes or shifts have you seen within the LA tech scene, and how does the community move forward together in this new normal?
Well, first I want to celebrate my fellow women in tech, Rachel and Mickey. They're like amazing. It's so exciting that we have them on today, because the number one thing that you find in LA that's different than anywhere else that I hear, and I think I've done over 400 plus podcast episodes on the We Are LA Tech podcast, collaboration, community, collaboration, community, collaboration, community. And what are Rachel and Mickey about? They're about collaboration and community. Like, without these wonderful women, this would not to leave you guys out. I love you guys, but I know these girls really well, and like they just rally the whole community together. And that's the one thing that stands out versus New York, versus Europe. I've traveled to over 100 countries now celebrating people in tech. I have the Women in Tech podcast, Brian, as you mentioned before. We Are LA Tech, where I spotlight LA Tech companies, founders, events. And it's amazing how we all rally together versus the other cities that exist. Like we elevate one another up. The other thing that I want to take a moment to do is, everybody watching right now is so brave to be going after what they want, and what Brian's doing and how he brings people together to be able to find the opportunities and accelerate their growth forward. This is like a really, really cool thing. I have a lot of respect for Brian, and I'm just really grateful to be part of this discussion.
That is so sweet. Really appreciate it. I love the fact that you really put a spotlight on the fact that it's community collaboration and bringing so many different perspectives together, particularly women and folks from underserved communities, LGBTQ community. And LA is really deliberate in how they approach bringing people together. And it's something that you don't necessarily, it's not for lack of trying, but it's very deliberate in LA. From the limited knowledge and the limited time I've researched and been a part and speaking with all of you guys and girls about what's going on. It's very deliberate, and it's really refreshing from my perspective and working with different communities all the time.
Totally.
To see. So that's really incredible.
To give you a little history of like how so I think I'm born and raised LA, and I built the first action sports social network. So like I was with like the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Toms from MySpace, like that was my life, right? And I had this group back then. I had an office with a movie theater in Santa Monica, and there was no tech scene. There was no tech scene. It was still all about screenplay writing and this kind of stuff. And then I would do this meetup group called Entrepreneurs Anonymous. So that's really, and people would come to my office. Now I always forget the year. Maybe you guys can help me, but when Koloff started, was it 2009 or 2010, like around there. Koloff had two co-founders, and they really championed community. They built the first really tech-centric co-working space, and it was based in Santa Monica. And I really think Koloff was responsible for driving the growth of the community, because what they did, they had people like Eric Ries, and they had Simon Sinek, and these like just Noah Kagan from AppSumo, like all these people really well known in the tech space come in and speak, and they'd have pizza nights. And Cam Kashani, who has been called in the newspapers as the godmother of Silicon Beach, they really rallied community together. And then you would see the accelerators start to come over, and then other founders start to move here, and that's just been growing since. Now Koloff is a thing of the past now, but I really think that event in the history of LA tech really like positioned us to like fast track forward and be one of the top 3 startup cities in the world. So it's exciting. Like it all started with community, and we continue to lead with community. I think that's the main advantage. Well, of course, community, collaboration, and entertainment. I mean, Hollywood, now entertainment. But what's so interesting is what I said before about when we were in the coffee shops and all we hear about is screenplay writings. Now all we hear about is startups and founders and investments. And it's very interesting, very interesting.
It's amazing how that evolution happens over a relatively short period of time. And
yeah, what is that? Eight, what is that? You guys, like 10, 12 years? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just remarkable. And, going off of that line of thought with community, it really is so important in order for a startup ecosystem to function properly, right? All of the stakeholders need to be in line. You have to have government, investment, talent, infrastructure. It all has to mesh together in order for it to work and for startups to really bloom out of that, which brings us to Mickey and her work at the intersection of all of these different groups and what she does at Grid 110. And, Mickey, how has Grid 110, your organization, adjusted its focus on entrepreneurial growth and innovation with the new normal? And what effect do you see this shift having on LA as a tech and business hub long term?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's definitely been a transition. So I'll give folks a little bit of context. So we're a nonprofit organization. We were started about 6 years ago, kind of, I would say, like in the second wave of startups and culture and the evolution of the LA tech ecosystem, where Espree was really on ground zero in the Silicon Beach area. So the west side of Los Angeles, where most of, and still today, I think most of LA tech is really centered around. So Santa Monica, Venice, Playa Vista. But I live and run our business in downtown Los Angeles, which is about 16 miles to the east. And so about 6 years ago, a group of entrepreneurs who lived or worked in downtown felt like there was the potential to build a second or another tech startup hub here in downtown Los Angeles. It was undergoing really a resurgence and a renaissance. It was becoming a place where people actually wanted to both live and work and play. It was a place that prior to 10 years ago, nobody really wanted to go. It was the financial, district of Los Angeles and the headquarters of a lot of businesses. But it has become really this dynamic, creative space where a lot of it's become a hub of its own. And I think we wanted to see, could we foster a sense of community for entrepreneurs that maybe didn't feel like they either were not close enough to the West Side area or didn't maybe identify with it. I think with Los Angeles, as Calvin had alluded to, being incredibly diverse with 73% of Angelenos identifying as a person of color, I think that it gives the opportunity and rise for all kinds of different communities to support the local startups that are here. And I think we've seen that over time where the West Side has, it's not the only place where you can see community developing in Los Angeles, in the greater Los Angeles area. I mean, Rachel's an example of that. I think we've seen pocket communities rise up in all parts of LA. And I think just the sheer geography has really led to that. So when we started Grid 110, it was how can we create and foster a sense of community for entrepreneurs that maybe felt like they didn't have access to it, build something right in their own backyard. But I think along the way of really growing the organization, we discovered kind of a white space in the tech ecosystem. And it's that there are companies that may not look like the traditional tech companies. They're not going to be venture backable. They may be starting a quote unquote lifestyle business, a more sustainable growth business. But there are places and pathways for all types of different companies. And so we run an accelerator program. We're in our 6th year of programming. As a nonprofit, we don't charge for programs and we don't take any equity, so it's free for people to participate. We're funded through the city of Los Angeles to really catalyze economic development through entrepreneurship. And so we work with founders that are anywhere from idea stage all the way through growth stage. So maybe they're in pre-seed or seed stage if they're seeking funding, and maybe they're post-revenue if they're bootstrapping. And so we see just like this eclectic and amazing diverse range of different entrepreneurs that the city of Los Angeles has become a home to. And I think it's really that inclusivity aspect that I look at of being able to see if you have an idea, if there's a problem that you want to solve, if you want to create a solution to something, that there is a space for you in that. And it doesn't have to be the next Snapchat or scalable growth type of company. You can build it into whatever company that you want to. And so at the beginning of COVID, we were actually getting set to launch our spring program. So our programs have always been in person. We really believe strongly in building community physically in person through these cohorts. And so we had to make a very quick turnaround decision to launch our programs virtual for spring. And they will actually remain virtual for the rest of the year. So we've been using Zoom through, just situations just like this. And I think the things that we noticed was one, the first change for us was really going into triage mode, being able to help support startups who had been negatively and adversely affected by COVID. We had companies that had completely lost segments of their customers because they could no longer reach them. We've had people have to lay people off. We've had people really try to figure out what is the new course of action, what are the opportunities and the relief efforts that are available for me. And so really trying to gather all of those resources and make them available for our founders. And then as we moved through this and kind of realized that this is the new normal, it's, what's the innovation that's going to come out of this? And so we've had companies pivot and really try to kind of catalyze on the opportunity of COVID because they found new customers, they found new pathways, they found new ways to do business through all of this. We just launched, or actually a month into launching a program in South Los Angeles and working with different types of founders there. And so it's really just seeing, how can you build a business during these times? What you once thought was going to be your pathway forward is no longer. And so what are the avenues, the funding pathways, the resources, the ways to connect to customers? How can you do that through what you're doing right now? And I think all industries are going through this. So like when we jumped into going through a virtual program, it was because we saw that education and schools were going, remote and doing things on Zoom, that everybody was working from home. And so it became a seamless pathway, I think, for us. And we're really fortunate that it didn't really affect the program and we were able to do everything on time as we said we would do it. We think that we've actually seen a lot of positives with running a program. And so for Angelinos here who understand how difficult it can be to get across the city, how terrible traffic is. I mean, I think having to do everything from, the comfort of your own home and not having to go anywhere and battle traffic is probably a blessing for a lot of people at this point. But there are those where, essential workers, so that's not the opportunity for them. And so I think it's, what types of opportunities does that give rise to in creating new solutions and businesses and services to help people navigate, what we're going through in this city right now, and what are the resources that we can provide through that. So I think we're really excited to be able to continue providing the virtual programs and resources that we can extend to our founders. And really thinking through, what does this look like to continue to provide support if we have to remain virtual? We're already planning on it through the rest of the year, but into next year, what does that start to look like? What do the needs of the companies start to look like? Do they change? Are they different? And so really just trying to always be on the pulse of what the needs of our companies are and how can we help connect them to the right resources, address them, and allow them to be successful in this type of environment.
And Mickey, how can they connect with Grid 110?
We are on the socials at Grid110, also grid110.org. Thanks so much, Espree.
Awesome. And I love how you really unpack that with application of the skills and the resources at different levels, because not everyone's going to be a Tinder or a Hulu, but at the same time, innovation is all about solutions and how do you serve customers and being able to reach companies at all different levels and stages and forms who have this concept of reworking the way things are doing, solving problems, and really approaching it from that perspective really does help inform startups who are seeking out these opportunities and trying to figure out what their next step is. So it's a really incredible initiative. And on that same note, would also love to loop in Rachel, who actively brings startups and resources together at Toolbox LA. And Rachel, from your perspective as both a mentor and an advocate of LA startups, how have startups and entrepreneurs looking to grow their business in LA adapted to today's challenges? And has their outlook on LA as a place to do business changed, if at all?
Yeah, well, thank you, Brian, for asking me to speak today. And I'm just so honored to be here with all these other amazing panelists. So awesome to see you guys. And I mean, for me, like, I'm born and raised in LA, so I'm all about, I love the city. I love everything about it. I'm like LA till I die. So, but in my experience here at Toolbox LA, I mean, the reality is that, some companies, right, have folded and have had to pivot and change. But, with Toolbox LA, we're the headquarters for Mila Capital, right? And Mila Capital, investing in tech you can touch. So meaning like manufacturing, hardware, product, right? So so LA, as you know, is the manufacturing capital of the United States, right? A lot of things are actually made here, not just movies, right? There's actual physical products that are made here. And, at Toolbox, we have a prototyping facility. So for the entrepreneurs and, the product designers that need access to a 3D printer and a laser cutter for prototyping to actually make physical things, right? It's still important, to actually like be physically somewhere, right? So, again, Mila Capital investing in, in drones and robots, and really solving hard problems, right? And, and clean tech and food tech and ag tech, right? All these, sort of big problems that are looming, investing in those startups that are doing something about that. There needs to be, physical space for prototyping. So a lot of, I would say, maybe some people are leaving, but no startup companies are leaving, right? That maybe a lot of things have shifted where people are remote, but no company is actually leaving LA. A lot of people are still, and, I think this, this pandemic and the process, you'll see there's going to be a lot of challenges. And I think, the strongest and the brightest will be able to hold on and survive. And I mean, there's just so many things. I feel like I kind of want to jump in ahead to, to why LA, because I mean, again, so some of the companies that are here at Toolbox LA, one of them is Jetpack Aviation. Espree knows, the founder, David Mayman, CEO, he was on.
Yeah, he's been on the show, yeah.
He was on the We Are LA Tech podcast, and, they make literally what it sounds like, a jetpack, right? And so they just raised, $2 million in November, and, for LA specifically, we have great weather, right? And that's important with aerospace and for testing and for drones, aerospace, all of that. It's important to be in LA because, consistently good weather creates, a great environment for testing. So, for them, they're not going anywhere, even though they're having a little trouble with visas and getting their workers here and so forth. There's that challenge, but they don't plan to leave. Also, Dash Systems, they provide a drone delivery. They're out in Hawthorne near SpaceX. And again, the aerospace company, chooses LA because of the open space. And so, yeah, we also, in here, we have a biotech lab as well, too. And so surprisingly, LA is also looking to be a big biotech hub. We have Medtronic, there's a lot of great, companies in the biotech space that are here that are also even in Toolbox LA. And, and really, I'd say like the great thing about LA is, like Espree mentioned, is that like the collision of the different types of people, right? You have, the artists and the creatives, and then you have the founders and the entrepreneurs. And when you create those opportunities for collision and you have all these great minds coming together, that's when the great ideas spark. And you see so many great companies that are started here. And like Mickey mentioned, there's so many opportunities, as a result. So yeah, that's it.
It's an incredible community from what I can tell because of the fact that everyone is on the same page, and that itself is a very difficult thing to do. And just referencing the poll that we just did for the audience, the number one factor that would influence you to start, relocate, grow your venture in LA. And we had 1, 2, capital investment and a supportive community, mentors and peers. And definitely on the second part, you have it. And I think I'd love to loop in Anuj on the first part, on the capital investment part. Is it that startups need to be more proactive in reaching out, or is it that because of the situation, it's a little bit, VCs are a little bit less visible? What would you say?
I think that because of the situation, there is, I think, a little bit more of a kind of a tepid viewpoint, at least for some investors. But I think, just going back to the point around LA and sort of the investment kind of community in LA, I think there's so much continuing excitement about the ecosystem here. And the fact that if you compare it today to what it was, 10 or 12 years ago, there's actually a true ecosystem here where companies are actually, where founders are actually coming out of existing LA companies and starting new companies. I mean, that didn't really exist in a major way, 12, 15 years ago. And so you're seeing more of that. You're seeing more people that can advise other companies. You're seeing more capital sources also. There are more funds that are now raised in LA that are specific to investing in LA. I mean, at BAM Ventures, so we're actually raising our third fund right now. We were founded by Brian Lee, who started LegalZoom here in LA, and a number of other, LA-based companies, Shoe Dazzle and the Honest Company. So our new fund, I mean, the majority of our investments are in LA. And, we're even more excited about it now because we're seeing the resiliency in a lot of ways that LA has had and the LA founders have had, and I think that's part of the culture of the LA entrepreneur. I think even, 10, 12 years ago, when the first handful of kind of larger LA-based companies came about, there weren't that many sources of capital. And so they had to really be scrappy and really, understand how to monetize their businesses. And I think that's really carried over to the way, the LA kind of entrepreneurs think. There's a lot more resourcefulness. There's a lot of kind of focus on developing products that actually have profitability, that have the ability to sort of grow and scale, and also sort of be sort of have the ability to sustain themselves. And I think that's really important as a mentality. So that kind of cultural mentality of entrepreneurs, I think, is important. And also when you combine that with kind of the culture that exists in LA that a few other people have referenced, of it being kind of a kind of a missionary kind of community, I mean, I think that's really important. I think a lot of other communities in the tech scene, it's a bit more mercenary, right? Where it's people that are going to companies and they're just, they're trying to collect their shares and move on and sort of do their own thing. And they don't, investment funds don't really share deals or anything like that. And LA is much more collaborative, and it's much more missionary. And I think that's a really unique feature of the ecosystem here that I think has evolved, just based on its roots here. And I think, everyone who started investing in LA years ago is still very excited about LA and the prospect of what might exist.
Enthusiasm and the momentum you get from just building on all the positivity and all of the really incredible innovation it is so influential and so important. And I also think it leads us to another question on, work from home and everything that comes with it. Why should companies physically still locate in LA? And Espree, I think you have a really good answer for that.
I actually would love Calvin and Anuj to give their feedback on their perspective of this with me. I think with what's going on with quarantine, there's going to be a massive influx from New York, from San Francisco, from all these other cities of just so much talent and so many investors that I know it seems weird. Like, why does it matter if we can't leave our homes right now to move to any city, period? That it doesn't matter how close you are to the beach if you can't go to the beach. But right now, you could rent cheaper and you get locked in. Office prices super low, or if you want a home office. And then when quarantine starts to like clear up, hopefully like sooner than later, there is going to be like the renaissance, if you could call it that, of like LA tech, or like this like growth spurt. I guess that's a better word, growth spurt. I mean, Anuj, Calvin, what do you think? Do you think that we're going to have this huge influx of talent too? And right now is the time to buy in because we could get better real estate prices and more opportunity?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great comment, Espree. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, in all the conversations that I'm having with, founders and investors across the country, there's still, it's one of those, again, one of those trends that kind of existed before COVID that now has accelerated. People have more interest in, Bay Area founders are talking about relocating to LA. New York founders are talking about coming to LA. If you think about like the Bay Area, I mean, it's far more expensive there than it is even in LA. And so LA has an advantage there. If you think about what's happened in New York with COVID, it's far worse there than it is. So, there are some advantages on a relative basis that LA has. And even if you think about sort of the fundamental context of LA, I mean, we're talking about, 10 million people in LA County, right? Which, it's the largest county in the United States, right?
Right.
If you talk about kind of the educational capability or the talent capability, it's one of the top sources of engineering and creative talent like in the world, right? Like 5 of the top 50 universities are right here in LA. If you talk about kind of the manufacturing or shipping or trade or any of those other elements, again, it's LA. I mean, there are so many things that you really can't replicate. And I think, the context of COVID has actually, I think, enhanced some of those things and made those things more apparent to a lot of people. So I agree with you 100% that's a trend that I think will occur, and I think you'll see, LA being kind of a net beneficiary.
And how you're saying, like, can't replicate, you can't, as much as we're showing up to these Zooms and virtual events as much as possible, the kind of business acceleration, I've produced over 400 in-person events for LA Tech, like that kind of in-person rapport can't be replicated virtually. And if you want to grow your business, you want to be, just like Anuj said, you want to be around the best people, the most talented people, the most diverse people in order to grow that much faster. Calvin, what are your thoughts on there being an influx of talent and opportunity in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I think just sort of building a little bit on what Mickey said about sort of this increased access that's afforded when we don't sit in traffic. What I hope is kind of a hybrid that we come out of this with, is that more people who are in, beyond the driving distance that would have held them back from certain networking opportunities or collaboration spaces, and this is really to sort of this kind of, this next level of LA Tech, because there's plenty of future hubs and plenty of talent and plenty of engineering talent, and also this whole new wave of, as some folks were alluding to, of hard science tech with biotech and aviation and intellectual property from universities, so that there's so much there. But I want us to still have, those in-person moments. So yeah, if you want to take advantage of that collaboration, I think that, that is sort of, I was trying to reflect on this from these last moments of the conversation of, you can go to a Women in LA Tech event or an Asian Americans in LA Tech event and find that networking space, and there'll be people who you can meet. And I think it's important to still invest in those in-person moments when it's safe. But I hope that in the meantime, we can kind of broaden out again that geography of who gets to be, in the day-to-day. And that'll be an interesting balance for us to figure out, because we want to drive back to the office, and that'll be a little bit of a dance for us.
And the last point I make is the thing that you can't take away, which is what I was talking about earlier, is you can't take away that we're a city that wants to elevate one another. We are a collaborative city that is really centric on community, that has a desire to elevate one another. And that is an extremely unique characteristic of Los Angeles Tech versus other tech cities in the world. Unfortunately, but also I'm happy to be here.
I think all of you really hit the nail on this one, because we keep preaching about community, but community is nothing if the community doesn't work together towards a common goal. And that's definitely what I'm seeing, just getting to hear from you guys for the past couple minutes on how do you approach things when you have the disruption, when you have all of these issues and work together. And referencing our second snap poll on why people wouldn't come to LA, I think we have an overwhelming winner about you can get the same work done elsewhere relatively effectively. And Calvin, I'll go back to you. What can other stakeholders who are involved, the VCs, the incubators, the universities, the accelerators, what can they do over the next 12 to 18 months to make sure that this momentum continues and grows?
And the momentum, again, just to speak to that again, around more the collaboration we've talked about.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, back to what we were saying a moment ago is really around, I think we're going to be in quarantine for a little minute. And I try not to think about that some Wednesdays and think about what month will these in-person events start to happen again. But I think the challenge for all of us is no matter where we are, and I sort of respond a little boldly to the poll question there, is that yes, we can effectively do work anywhere. I love being able to like make coffee, sit in some pajamas and write emails at 8 a.m. But there are certain moments of the day where we push and pull on colleagues where I can't knock on my boss's office anymore and stick my head in and kind of influence in person the way I could. And I think that, and much has already been said about the little bit of an increased hurdle of building a good personal relationship that sometimes comes from just sharing space with someone 2 or 3 times. So I'm hoping that over this next year, we can find ways to invest in personal relationships. Sometimes that may sound silly, but I'm coordinating a happy hour on Thursday. We're proactively thinking about breakout groups and who to put in smaller spaces with each other, because like being on the Brady Bunch Zoom wall is not always fun for everybody for hours and hours. So I think thinking about relationships as a focus point as we're in this will matter. But yeah, also to take advantage of that increased geography of anything that you would have had to do, particularly for startups that, for example, let's say want to host an internship. The price of entry is so much lower because you don't have to buy cookies and catering. You can host a Zoom meeting and figure out those things at a much lower cost. And now the city and county are interested in helping you pay for it in some cases. So I think that it's a question of people setting aside that time and figuring out how to do that and take advantage of people from all kinds of places that could be working together now.
That collaboration and the adaptation, frankly, of how do you really move forward, but at the same time, keep people engaged to the point that work is still being done and the culture is still being kept. It's such a fine balance to carry, and it's so important. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I think the last couple minutes and us discussing where does LA go, how does the community respond, and where does it go from there, really brings up how do you also capture new people? And we've referenced this at different points. So Rachel, would love to ask you first, if you were to pitch a startup or a scale up to launch or relocate their operations to LA over the next 12 to 18 months, what would be your top 3 reasons for them to do so?
Sure. So, I mean, speaking from experience with the companies here at Toolbox LA, the companies we've invested in at Mila Capital, again, manufacturing capital of the United States. We have access to 2 of the largest seaports, right? We also have, transcontinental rail systems set up. So the infrastructure and logistics and all that is here. I mean, we have, the multicultural gateway to the Pacific Rim and Latin America. I mean, physically where we're at is a good spot. And again, can't say it enough, the good weather, like the sunshine just makes you happy. Like that's really, the end of the story. And again, but relative to aerospace, right? I mean, again, that's why it's really good. And if you're like physically making something, like come to LA, because this is the place where it's easy to just plug and play. You have supply chain, logistics, infrastructure, shipping, it's all here. So if you're physically, making a physical product, whether it's hardware or anything like that, LA is a place to be. And just in general, the ecosystem is vibrant. You have so many people coming from all around the world with, a wealth of experience, a lot of, managerial talent as well, people with diverse backgrounds. And really, I mean, again, to go back to community and collaboration, when you have people, you know, we have the artists and the designers and the marketing talent and entertainment, all of that, the, you know, the cross intersection of all of those talented people together really makes for amazing things.
Mickey, would also love to loop you in here. How would you sell a startup or a little bit more established tech company to come to LA?
Yeah, I'll echo, I think, what both Rachel and Anuj mentioned about the talent in terms of Los Angeles producing the most amount of engineering talent, but also the creative talent that we have here because of Hollywood. So I think the access to talent and like the accessible access to that talent, because Los Angeles is so large that we're not just talking about talent that's based in Santa Monica, it's talent that can be based in Orange County or in Pasadena or in the Valley. When it comes to being able to maintain, you know, quality of life and affordability of it, you don't have to be centrally located in a particular place, particularly right now. And I think there's a quality of life element. I mean, Rachel mentioned the weather, but you're two hours away from being able to go to the mountains, to the desert, to, you know, all types of different places. And so even though we are stuck here during quarantine right now, you have the opportunity to take these kind of mini breaks and making sure that you're kind of taking care of yourself and have these adventures. And so I think that to be able to have the opportunity to live in a large metropolitan city, as Espree mentioned, you know, one of the top startup cities in the world, but to also have this playground to be able to escape in. I think just Los Angeles provides so much, and I'll say diversity, but in terms of food and culture and experiences. And so I think there's really not many places that are like it. And I think the opportunity to be able to be part of this community that I think is exceptional and is really different from what we see in Silicon Valley and in New York, the collaboration that people have talked about. Like I can't like emphasize that enough, that people are so willing to take, you know, warm introductions, be helpful. How can we work together? And I think even from the investment side, that there is a lot of early stage capital here. And while that shouldn't be a barrier depending on where you are, I think there are a lot of investors who really want to invest locally and are providing the resources and the necessary means to be able to grow and build your company here.
So let's see if we got this. We got community collaboration. We have an incredible diversity and equality efforts. And then we have LA as an incredible playground to escape in. I think that's really well-rounded pitch for anyone who's interested in jumping in and getting involved in LA and being a part of the LA tech scene.
And we're all here to support everybody watching. So like I run We Are LA Tech, and feel free to connect with We Are LA Tech. Mickey mentioned Grid 110. You want to share how to connect with Grid 110 again, Mickey? We're not done. We're doing Q&As, but it's really important that we're not just on a screen. We're here. We're showing up to be here for you. This is a connective experience. I mean, I'm about to jump out of like the ground. I'm so excited to be connecting with you right now. So how can people be a part of the Grid 110 community, Mickey? And Rachel, same thing with Make in LA.
I just dropped it in the chat that our website is there. We actually just closed applications for our programs in fall, but we, in conjunction actually with Calvin and Pledge LA, are announcing something soon really exciting for anybody who happens to be based in Los Angeles, who is Black or Latinx, something very exciting coming up for founders that are building in that space. And
Rachel, how can people connect with you at Make in LA?
Yeah, I put my email. It's rachel@toolbox.la or @toolboxla and all the socials and all that. And for more info on Mila Capital, it's mila.vc. And again, you know, for Mila also in terms of, you know, investing in diversity. I mean, we have in terms of, you know, immigrants, women founders, you know, Black and Latina founders are definitely, you know, over 50% for all the above.
Cool. And Calvin, how can they connect with Pledge LA?
Visit pledgela.org or look me up on LinkedIn.
And Anuj, I know BAM is very exclusive, but is there a community gateway that people could access some of your intel, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Twitter is probably the fastest way. I'm at Anuj Varma on Twitter, and then you can email me at avarma@bam.vc.
Yeah, and I'll put my Twitter. I'm sure everybody will put their Twitter. Actually, that's a good idea in the chat too. I'm at Espree Devora. So Brian, you have a ton of awesome questions for us.
Yes, I do. But in line with talking about how do we connect and contact. So everyone who's registered for the event, who's watching now or who will watch it after we distribute it, you're going to get a list of everyone's LinkedIn. via email. So in case you couldn't write everything down or screenshot everything now, you're going to get it in about 4 days. So moving on to questions. We have Murat, who's asking, he wants to start and introduce an idea on SaaS. He has an MVP. What's the best way for him to pitch to investors and mentors? So Anuj, I'm going to go to you first on the VCs and investor side. What's the best way for him to really approach folks with his idea?
Yeah. So I think the first piece of advice would be just make sure you have a buttoned up story and make sure you've gotten feedback from the right people to sort of communicate your story well. So if you're working with an accelerator or if you're working with other mentors or advisors, make sure you take the first step of making sure your story is as complete as it can be. I think the next step really is the best way to get connected to a VC is through like a warm introduction. So, try to get through your network. If there's somebody who's connected to somebody you're trying to get in touch with, use that avenue as a way to get introduced. That'll increase your odds of getting a response significantly, right? And even as you're approaching, a venture investor, I would make sure do a little bit of your own homework and make sure that it's the right fit for what you're raising. If you're talking about a SaaS company, you may not want to approach an investor that's focused on biotech, for example. So just make sure you understand what their focus and what their strategy is. And along those lines, I mean, if you're like an early stage, kind of seed stage company, don't approach somebody who's investing in like Series C, Series D, later stage rounds. You want to make sure it's the right fit from a stage and sector standpoint. So those are the few things I think you definitely want to focus on. And it takes time, it takes persistence. I would say certainly don't give up and just keep at it and continue to sort of build and refine your story. And make sure you're leaving somebody who you're telling the story to with the right messaging. And when you leave that meeting or leave that call or Zoom call, you want to make sure they're thinking about you and that their impression is that, wow, like this is something very unique. This is something that this founder is uniquely qualified for. They've made a lot of interesting kind of progress in what they're doing. And this could be something really, really big in the future. So those are the kind of messages you want to leave an investor with, as you're pitching and as you're sort of seeking capital for your venture.
Definitely, and also would love to loop in Mickey on this as well. Anything you want to add about how can people reach out and communicate with folks who are mentors or investors in the community? Any recommendations you have?
So this isn't specific to SaaS, but Slack communities are an incredible resource. Espree started one a couple of years ago that I'm still in, that I've actually met some really cool people through. It's the We Are LA Tech Slack community. I dropped one in the chat. Bunch of founders is for underrepresented founders and allies from wherever you are in the world. I think because we're limited in terms of our interactions and how we can meet people, I think a lot of people are looking to new digital channels to be able to meet people. So whether it's Facebook groups for different types of founders or Slack communities, or even if you see events. So I mentioned .la, which hosts a lot of events similar to this. So I think being able to connect with people, if there are a lot of pitch opportunities right now, so virtual pitch opportunities. So practice your pitch, submit for those, get any kind of exposure opportunities that you can, even if it's a small group. I think the more that you talk about what you're working on, the more you ask specifically for feedback, the more that you will learn and the more that you will open yourself up for opportunities. I think a lot of people get really scared to talk about their idea. They don't want someone to steal it. But it really, there are no original ideas out there. It's really about your execution. And so don't be afraid to talk about what you're doing, openly and widely, because you never know who is listening, the advice or the resources that they'll be able to share with you, and where that will take you from there.
And to virtually mix in the community, Mickey, what's Rachel Horning's organization's name? I'm spacing on it right now. Or any of you, do you know Rachel?
I know one was Startups in the Sky, but there's
Startups in the Sky. Well, just Google Rachel Horning. She does so many awesome virtual events for LA Tech right now. It's awesome. Rachel Horning. Just Google her or email me. I put it in the chat if you need it, and I'll send it to you after.
Wonderful advice. We have our next question from our friend Lafayette Julius. He's great patron and friend to our organization at Line Run. What percentage of Black and Latinx founders would you say are in LA? So Calvin, I'm gonna turn to you on this one.
Well, I'd say that's a difficult question to answer in terms of a precise number, but one way that is perhaps an imperfect and a concerning way to answer it is about what we're seeing about the percentage of investment dollars that go to them. So from our most current data as of this past year, when we looked at all of the portfolios of Pledge LA's VC firms, and we looked at the identity of the founders that they invested in, we saw that 6% of founders were Latinx and 7% were Black. We know that there are a lot more than 6% of Angelinos are Latinx. A common stat you hear every so often is that 1 in every 2 Angelinos born today is Latinx. So I think the way that we kind of invite both LAVCs to think about that in terms of portfolio diversity is sort of to have that conversation. I mean, one of the things that Pledge LA hosted kind of a roundtable of VCs thinking about the diversity of their investments earlier this year. And one of the things that was kind of surprising is a lot of firms hadn't talked about it as such. Some folks even thought that talking about who you might invest in was sort of like a little bit of a weird kind of affirmative action discrimination kind of zone, as opposed to maybe something that might be held as an intention that is not necessarily something would have to be public. But at the same time, it was interesting because I heard some firms say, yeah, we look for a lot of people who don't necessarily have to have a bachelor's degree, or a lot of veteran founders. So I think we're entering a new phase where some people are talking about those goals a little more publicly. But yeah, I think that there's certainly a lot more investment in both women and founders of color that we need to see to sort of say anything close to what the community looks like here.
It's always a constant battle to get more representation and to really try to equalize the playing field for as much as the efforts that are going into it. It does take time. So definitely looking forward to seeing how the LA community really bands together and tries to get those numbers up and to create a more equal opportunity access type environment, more so than it is now, which is way ahead of a lot of other people. Going to Sandra's question, I think Espree, you'd be the best one for this. Other platforms you're experimenting with to create more connection and community other than Zoom. So Zoom, hot topic, pop culture word now, but obviously has its limitations. Any recommendations?
You mean as far as community connecting, or just the Zoom platform itself? Because I have a whole list of apps that are Zoom alternatives. You could email me for those. To connect with community, I mean, I really do that through podcasting. Podcasting to me is a way to unite people together. It's not a way for me to become something. I do it as a service for community, and people have gotten hired through my podcast. People have found their co-founders. People have gotten married and had babies, like by audience to guest to, it's just crazy. Like, it's crazy the impact that the podcast has had. So, I mean, if you have questions on how to podcast and how to rally community with a podcast, feel free to email me, Espree@wearelatech.com, or @Espree Devora on Twitter. I'm happy to walk you through that. I occasionally do community office hours, but I'm really gung-ho on not being the next Joe Rogan, but utilizing podcasting for social impact and and connection, like really forming meaningful connection. Other ways to do that, Mickey mentioned Slack, really utilizing Slack and utilizing the video feature within Slack. So there's all these great Slack groups. I think Rachel posted I Fund Women. Mickey, you posted, I think it's Bunch of Founders, right? Am I getting it right? Yeah, and then I have We Are LA Tech Slack. But I really recommend, when you find all these Slack groups, to utilize video to say hello, on Twitter responses to utilize video to say hello. There's so many great ways to utilize video, because that's how you get personal right now when we have to be at a distance physically. You want people to still be able to see you. I even use Loom and emails to say hi, and I don't have makeup and my hair done. I'm totally with bunched hair, totally dirty, but I'll say hi anyway, just so people get that personal feel of who I am, and that, it really matters to me that they're spending the time time to reach out to me and connect. So I'd say my 3 top tips are Slack communities and really engaging in there, and as well as podcasting, learning how to podcast, and then utilizing video in your communication. Does that help? Does that answer it, Brian?
Yes, definitely. I think we covered the wide spectrum, and I really appreciate all the detail.
Oh, and Calvin posted icebreaker.video. Rad.
Yes.
Give me 5.
All right. So Annette, we have about 2 more minutes. We can get to Annette's question. How will the election influence the climate of tech and startups in LA? Does anyone want to take a really quick stab at that, as in 2 minutes? Anyone? Oh.
I'll say a little something. So I sit on the advisory board for the assembly member, Jesse Gabriel, in our district. And, you know, our mayor, Eric Garcetti, is amazing. He's a champion for LA Tech. And so regionally within LA, there's a lot of initiatives and things that we're doing to support the ecosystem here. So we kind of have already, like, the people here kind of have each other's back already. So kind of regardless of what happens, you know, on a national level, I think we have a lot of support, you know, happening locally. So not to say that we won't be unscathed, but I feel like we do have support here with our leaders here locally.
Brian, I totally forgot. It's crazy that I forgot. There's the Facebook groups too. Silicon Beach private Facebook group, and we Are LA Tech Facebook group. And there's if you type Los Angeles in Facebook, that's a great way to connect with the community too, to find all the LA Tech. There's LA Tech Startup. They just look up LA Tech, LA Startup, We Are LA Tech, and join all of them to immerse yourself with people in the community.
Definitely. Facebook groups are extraordinarily helpful. And last question we have is from Dastin. Why are venture capitalists why do they get involved in events like these in order to connect the community? What do they get out of it? So we have a few folks who are involved in VC, and I could tell you I have a VC on every single one of these programs, and it really comes down to 3 things for me. One, the community and trying to get plugged into what's going on and being involved. 2, you know, it doesn't, a good lead for a startup can come from anywhere. So really being visible. And I think number 3, and why a lot of people really love joining these conversations, is you don't always get to see or hear from folks from the other sides of the community. So getting to have that interaction and learn and see what are the trends from the other side of the fence is always very helpful. So Das and Hope, we were able to answer that question. But we are right on time, and you know, this was an incredible conversation, I gotta say. And you know, just listening to the 5 of you makes me want to be part of the LA Tech community, because it's so you can feel the passion through the screen. And for as much as Zoom has the limitations on keeping people in the little boxes, it really is infectious. And I can't thank the 5 of you enough for participating, and also for our audience for watching this evening. Before we say goodbye though, want to share 2 things. Cities of Tech, we do this every single month. LA obviously is what we're doing now. Next week, we're gonna take a road trip up north, and we're going to Silicon Valley. So we're going to check out what's going on in Silicon Valley. And then in October, we're taking a road trip over to Seattle. So stuff to watch out for. Another event that I'm really interested in, I'm really excited for, because it's part of what I do every day, Smart Cities. August 18th. So check that out. And then we have data on September 22nd. So linerun.co/events for anyone who's interested. And one last thing, probably the number 1 question I get doing these events every week, aside from can you connect me with the folks who talked at the event, is how did you do this, and how do you get people to talk and to share stuff? And I'm considering, if we can get enough people who are interested, doing one of these videos and showing people how to actually host your own events. So if that's something you're interested in, I will do it in September. And email me at info@linerun.co. Tell me you're interested. If we get 20 people, I will do it. So
It's awesome. I hope everybody emails you right now.
you know, I'll put that offer out there. I'm going to do that for the rest of August. If I get 20 people who say that they're interested in seeing the whole process, I will do it and walk people through this whole thing and how to connect with really incredible folks like all of you who have graciously given your time. As I mentioned a little while ago, all the information, all the contact information that we shared in the chat through our discussion, they will all be in the email that you're going to get in the next couple of days. So if you register for the event, you're going to get the information. Feel free to reach out to any of our panelists. They're more than willing to have a conversation with you. Believe me, I can attest to that firsthand. I met nearly all of them just 3 weeks ago. Calvin, I met you on Friday. So I'm serious. Reach out to them. That's all I got. Really amazing conversation. And again, thank you so much. Thank all of you watching so much for joining us, and hope this was impactful and helpful. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
LA all day.
That was rad.